Hello, my name is John Cornicello, and I welcome you to my series of live interactive online conversations. You can find a list of upcoming shows at cornicello.com/conversations. You can also find links to past shows there. Today, my guest is Deanne Fitzmaurice. Deanne is a Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist and commercial photographer who's known for her ability to get behind the scenes to discover and convey personal, intimate, and emotional stories through her images. So please welcome Deanne Fitzmaurice. You can talk now. You're unmuted.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here. I'm excited to share my story with you.
Great. You titled this thing, Luck is a State of Mind.
Yes, yes. You know, I've been spending some time thinking about my work and thinking about what it is about it that is truly me. And also I've been thinking about how to talk about it. So I've been working on a presentation, and this is a theme that came up, that luck is a state of mind. So I'm in the process of building a show. So I'm going to go through that and share with you some of my thoughts behind this.
Great.
Yep.
So you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Yep. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and play this. Okay, wait 1 second.
Sure.
I want to play this in a window. There we go. Okay, let me expand this out. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to go through and give you some of my thoughts on this topic. And John, feel free if you want to jump in and ask questions.
Sure.
Otherwise, I'll just proceed along.
Okay, great.
Everything look good on your end?
Yep.
Okay, great. So as a staff photographer for the San Francisco Chronicle for 2 decades, through a time of significant shift in our social structures, political landscape, environmental change, and the ins and outs of daily life, you might imagine I've seen quite a bit. Sometimes I'd be asked to photograph the mundane, and sometimes I'd be asked to cover a significant event like the Loma Prieta earthquake. To stay equally engaged throughout all of this, I have made a commitment to not shoot insignificant photographs, or at least to try not to. This is a story about Michael Vick's dogs. You may remember that Michael Vick's, the NFL player, had this ring of pit bulls, and some of them were abused. They were fighting, and there was a big bust, and a lot of people came forward to adopt these dogs. And this was a story I did for Sports Illustrated about some of the dogs that were adopted. So I talk about luck is a state of mind. And what do I mean by that? I find that going into a situation with confidence, feeling prepared, having done some research, but the key is leaving room for things to unfold. And, I trust that these moments are going to unfold in front of me. That the people I need to meet for the story will come along. This was at Burning Man. And, I saw the Santa sitting there and I said, oh, well, this is pretty good. I photographed this. And along comes this woman and shares a drink with him. So Burning Man is a wonderful place to photograph. I don't know how many of you have been there, but it sure is interesting.
Yeah, a number of us have.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about here.
Yes.
You think about the stories that come to you, and general curiosity about what stories we go to. So I was on a plane and I was flying from San Francisco. I was flying up to your area, John. I was flying up to Seattle. And I was sitting there in my aisle seat, and all of a sudden I see this woman come walking down the aisle, tall, over 6 feet tall. She had short, spiky hair and lots of tattoos. And I was curious, what her story was. And, as the way things go, she ends up sitting in the seat next to me, in the middle seat. She sits down, she tells me that she's a Lutheran pastor. Not really what I was expecting to hear. But we start talking and she shares her story with me and tells me about what it was, about her congregation. She lives in Denver and she has a really interesting congregation. Some people that have been struggling with addiction and people trying to find their way back. So I was fascinated with this story that she was telling me. And I said, I would love to come to Denver and tell your story. I'd like to learn more about your congregation. And she said, no, I'm not interested in that. And my congregation is not interested in that. And so I was a little disappointed, but when the flight ended, she's getting up and walking off the plane. She turned to me and she said, if you're serious about wanting to come to Denver, you know my Twitter. So I thought, okay, I'm going to wait about a week and I'm going to determine, is this something I really want to do? Am I still thinking about it a week later? And I was. But before the week even ended, she ended up contacting me and she said, Deanne, the Washington Post wants to do a story about me. And I suggested you as the photographer and they want to fly you to Denver. So next thing I knew, I was off to Denver. I went there and photographed her. And it's just a funny thing about serendipity and about following the things that we're interested in, and also about giving people an opportunity to say yes. Maybe some part of her knew the story was worth sharing. Things don't always come together instantly, but I find that if I have patience, things will reveal themselves. So this faith in serendipity, like what happened on this plane, grounds me and helps me to take chances and be bold. So, she's a real badass. She gets up every morning. She goes to CrossFit, 6 a.m. Really interesting person. So it was just a wonderful opportunity to go there and tell her story. So by nature, I'm a positive person. I try to see the best in people. I try to look for the one thing that stands out, to shine a light. This is a story I did about sex trafficking. We had learned that there were these massage parlors in San Francisco and that some women were being held against their will. So we wanted to go in and tell this story. a really, really difficult story to tell, as you can imagine. But this one brave young woman, Yumi, came forward and told us her story and told us what happened to her. So I had the opportunity to photograph her, but she didn't want her identity shown. Because of those restrictions, I was forced to come up with something more creative, and that's what I did here. So sometimes restrictions can help you come up with something more creative, is what I found on that story. I heard about this story in New York, actually, about Chrissy Cocktail, and she is the blade throwing target for Throwdini. She works at the Coney Island Circus Sideshow. And I wanted to go in and tell her story. So I told her what I wanted to do. I was able to get access. And I also found out that she's not only a circus performer, but she also is a mom. And so I thought it was just a really interesting story. You know, just showing this juxtaposition in her life of her being this blade throwing target for Throwdini, but also being a mom. And here she is just going to work. So what I'm trying to do with these stories is to show humanity, just kind of get behind the curtain and show who these people are. Another story that came along, it was just last summer, it was summer of 2020. And, you know, we're all in the midst of this lockdown. And I really felt like I needed to go out and work on some personal projects and, you know, just feeling like I needed to get out and do something creative. And there were these big protests happening in Oakland. And I heard this story about this woman that showed up at the protest. And she was, you know, this tall Black woman, and she came into the protest on her horse and marched through the protests like that. And so it was a big story. People were talking about it. And I became so curious about her. I said, who is this woman? Did some research and I ended up reaching out to her. So many times I find I can take an event and find the deeper story behind it. So I found out that she also works with inner city kids and she helps them learn about horsemanship and horseback riding and developing skills to help with their confidence. So I'm thinking, you know, she is really out there doing it. She's an amazing person. She's a pillar in her community. And she started telling me stories about, you know, how when she was a kid, she was 8 years old, she started taking horseback riding lessons and she was the only Black kid. And she just decided to do something about it. You know, and here she is working within the community, you know, really making a difference.
So we had a quick question in the chat, though, from Melissa about model releases on the bus photo with the woman. She's asking if you needed a print release there.
Yeah, it's a good question. Generally, I look at a distinction between editorial work and commercial work. If it's a photo that's going to be used for any commercial uses, then you will need a release for the people. But if it's for editorial use, which is what that was for, it's okay. You don't need a release. I always recommend getting a release whenever you can. It's not always possible, but it's good to get it. But it really depends on how the photograph is going to be used. And that was not being used for commercial uses.
Thanks.
Yep. So here is Brianna Noble is her name. And she also rescues horses. She rescues horses that, you know, have been abused or, you know, she's like a horse whisperer and she knows how to bring horses back and train them and give them confidence. And here she is out in the Delta with her horse, Dapper Dan. So unlike fine art photography, photojournalism is done for a reason. Our goal is to draw your attention to something specific and to spark emotion. It won't work unless you're moved to act or to feel something. So I'd like you to meet Brent Bretz. He's a US soldier from the Iraq War. He earned a Purple Heart. You know, it's easy to, you know, we heard all the numbers of soldiers that were injured in the war, and it's pretty abstract sometimes. And I wanted to humanize one of these soldiers and show what his life was like. You know, kind of show the human side of the war. You know, so as a photographer photographing these kind of things, I needed to feel something so that I can photograph it. I need to capture it with my empathy, but I can't feel it so deeply that it paralyzes me. It's only when we feel that we'll be moved to act. But Brent, he found love, and he has a daughter now, a daughter named Celeste. So it's really about taking an issue many times for me and figuring out how to humanize it. The other way that a photograph can be effective is if it stops you in your tracks and freezes time. Our lives are so busy and we're constantly hit by a barrage of input. We've grown almost numb to stimulus. These are goats in a tree in Morocco. So what I try to do sometimes is find a mundane subject like rain, and how do I photograph it in a way that is compelling? And this is just shot through my windshield, and I'm always thinking about layers. Foreground, middle ground, and background. Thinking of the image from edge to edge. How can we create depth in an image? How can we create depth within the storytelling and depth within the structure of the photograph? One way of doing that is to look for the less obvious, for juxtapositions. Now, this is a photograph of Gibson. He was the tallest dog in the world, Great Dane. I went out there to photograph him, and he shows up with his little best friend, this little Chihuahua.
Reminds me of an Elliot Erwitt photo.
Of course, how can we not think about Elliot Erwitt with that? Of course, I am influenced by him. I think he's one of the greatest photographers in the world. A wonderful sense of humor, and I know that that photograph was in my subconscious when I saw that. But you know, for an image to make the cut for me, they hopefully have three critical elements: light, color, and moment. Sometimes they have one of the three, sometimes two of the three, and in best case scenarios, three. But those are three elements that I'm always looking for. These are photographs from Cuba, a place near and dear to my heart. They're having some challenges there right now, so.
Are you still planning to go back there later this year?
I am really hoping so. I'm scheduled to teach a workshop there with Summit Workshops in November.
Mhm.
I have the event listed on my website. I am not sure. We're watching very, very closely with what's happening there. In terms of the political situation, in terms of the COVID situation. So, we're really hoping that we're going to be able to go, but we're going to have to wait till we get closer to the time,
Mhm.
to really make a decision on whether we should move forward with this or
Yeah.
not.
I mean, Cuba is an interesting place. Even myself, who's nowhere near a street photographer or landscape, feels like one there. There's just so many opportunities, and people are so open and friendly.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a place, street photography and Cuba go hand in hand.
Mhm.
Yeah, like you say, it's a really comfortable place to walk around and photograph people because they are so open. And it just feels like on every block there are so many photographs. Just the color, the life, the vibrancy.
Back to the desert.
Yeah. A few more pictures here of Burning Man. And I always think about how can I strip away the excess when I'm trying to tell a story. There should be nothing in the image that's not helping to tell the story that you want to tell.
Thunderdome.
Yes, sounds like Burning Man well. In here, it's about color. Just, looking for the thing that is special, picking up on the ambiance, picking up on the mood of the places where we photograph. So at my best, I am of service to the subject that I'm photographing. I try to disappear. I try to make a connection with the people I'm photographing, but then I try to become invisible. I'm observing deeply. I'm watching gestures. I'm watching body language. I'm looking for authenticity and rawness. Let me just go back 1 second here. This is a story that I did. Whoops, sorry. There we go. This is a story I did about a brothel in Nevada. I just happened to be driving through the desert and I saw this sign, girls, 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 stopped my car, walked in, and the madam there, she was surprised to see me standing there with my camera. But it just came down to, of course, she says, no, there's no way you can come in here and photograph. But it's about just building that human connection, building trust, speaking from my heart so that she believes me, she trusts me, and then she lets me in. And I also have some work that I did on sex trafficking, which I referred to earlier. I went to Asia to photograph this story, trying to tell the story of the sex trade, in America and in Asia. And I'm always interested in going behind closed doors, taking an issue and figuring out, how do I tell this story? How do I humanize this issue? There's a crescendo when the perfect storm aligns in a peak moment. And this is part of a story I did up in, I was in the Dakotas, and it was a story up there on Pine Ridge Reservation. And, like sometimes the elements just come together. And here it's about light, moment, gesture. You see these elements coming together. You see this light going across the horse's back, and then you see the shadow from the dog that's in the back of the pickup truck, and you just watch as these elements come together. Sometimes they align beautifully and sometimes they don't. Sports has been a big part of the work that I've done throughout my career. And, I learned something valuable from everything I've covered. More than anything, sports has taught me to anticipate where the action is going to go. So on the football field, I need to think about, where do I want to be? Where do I anticipate the action is going to go? Same thing when I'm in a room photographing someone. I need to anticipate, where are they going to go? And I want to be ahead of the action.
So on a football field, how much opportunity or choice to move do you have? Are you placed in a position or do you get to move around a bit?
You get to move around quite a bit. For the big games like this is a Super Bowl. This was January of 2020. So it was right before the pandemic. And I was in Miami photographing the Kansas City Chiefs against the 49ers. And Super Bowls are a little bit different. So for a Super Bowl, generally they'll give you a quadrant or a half. But in this particular Super Bowl, I did have some freedom to move around. There were two of us photographers shooting for ESPN, and I took one half of the field and the other photographer took the other half. There were actually three photographers. One other photographer was overhead. So, I'm trying to figure out, what could be the biggest play of this game? And right here it was fourth quarter. If an interception happens, that's the play of the game. Where do I have to position myself for that? I positioned myself, and this big interception did happen, and it changed the course of the game. So it's about figuring out where I need to be. Now, here I am. Here's an example of, sidelines at the game. Now, I do have to tell you, sometimes I'm not always in the right position, speaking about where to position yourself. One time early on, I was just trying to figure out football, trying to figure out, how do I cover this game and how do I capture the moments? So it was an early game I was shooting of the 49ers, and I was on the sidelines at Candlestick Park, and I was waiting a little bit too long to capture that special moment when the receiver catches the ball. Steve Young throws the ball. John Taylor, the receiver, he goes to catch the ball, and he is running. He's running directly towards me. And I'm there kneeling, and I'm thinking, I'm just waiting and waiting to catch this moment. I waited a little bit too long. I brought the camera down, looked up, and there he is right in front of me, running full speed. And I'm just thinking, okay, this is where I die. But I tried to get up. I was in the midst of getting up, and he just scooped me up. He put his arms under mine, lifted me up, and carried me with him all the way to the stands. The announcer says, "Whoa, John Taylor just picked up a lady photographer." So sometimes, I'm not always in the right position on the sidelines, but, it's always a lesson for me about, being prepared in the moment. I want to be in the right position. I want to capture the moment, but I don't want to get killed in the process. So these are just from the Super Bowl, but it's kind of to give you the feel of being on the sidelines there. The last photo is on the Jumbotron. So sometimes there is a story that eclipses all others. There's all these stories that I've been talking about that I've done over the years. And sometimes it's a really big story. that just grabs you and it won't let you go. And that's what happened with this story. The US invasion on Iraq had just begun. A 9-year-old boy named Salah and his older brother Deir were walking home from school in a small village near Nasiriyah, where Salah saw a shiny object that looked like a ball. He picked it up. Deir knew it was a bomb and tried to pry it out of Salah's hands. During the struggle, the bomb blew up, killing Deir and severely injuring Salah. Salah's father, Rahim, rushes to the scene, sees that one son has died and the other is unconscious. He scoops up Salah, brings him to an Iraqi hospital where they knew it was beyond their capabilities, and immediately directed them to the American Air Force Base, where he was treated by Dr. J. Johanneman, here in this photo. After working on him for 6 days, Dr. J turned to Rahim and said, "Your only hope is to bring him to the Americans." The next day, I was in the San Francisco Chronicle photo lab. My editor rushes into the lab and says, "Deanne, drop everything. A gravely injured Iraqi boy was just flown in from overseas and is being treated at Oakland Children's Hospital. We need a photo for tomorrow's paper." So writer Meredith May and I grabbed our stuff and headed out to my car. Salah's abdomen had been blown open. He lost his left eye, his right hand, and all but 2 fingers on his left hand. Not knowing what to expect, we walked into the ICU, saw him, and we had to step out and collect ourselves. When I walked back in, Rahim put his hands together in gratitude and lifted the sheet so we could see the extent of Salah's injuries. In that moment, I knew that this was a story that needed to be told. I also knew it was sensitive and that it would be complicated. We would need permission from everyone involved, his family, his doctors, and the hospital. So for 6 weeks, I documented his progress through dozens of surgeries. And there were highs and lows throughout the process. Eventually, Salah was released from the hospital, and we expected that he and Rahim would return to Iraq to be reunited with their family. However, insurgents had ransacked the family home, mistakenly thinking that Rahim must be an American spy, and that's why his child was getting medical care in the US, so it wasn't safe for them to return. This is the first time in 6 weeks that Salah had done any kind of play. And what's the first thing he does? He draws an airplane dropping bombs. So we were publishing this story in the San Francisco Chronicle as we went along. The story got a lot of attention. There was an ER nurse who had fallen in love with Salah and helped raise funds to get them a small apartment near the hospital. They had been granted asylum so that they could stay in America. And this was move-in day. Salah and his father were moving into this little apartment. Salah was jumping up and down, singing, "No more doctors." So he was really excited at that moment, thinking, "Oh, I'm out of the hospital. This is great." But the joy was short-lived. When he went out into the world, people stared at him, and he started to process that he might never see his mom and siblings again. A few minutes later, he ran out into the street crying. Rahim had to chase him through traffic. When they got home, he crumbled at his dad's feet in despair. Since it was clear they needed to stay in America, Rahim got a job as a nighttime custodian at Children's Hospital. He applied for asylum, got that for he and Salah, and then also applied for the rest of the family to receive asylum. Salah enrolled in school and began to make friends, but there was a big hole in his heart still. While they lived with the uncertainty to know if the family would be reunited. After a long wait, the family was allowed to emigrate to the United States. The San Francisco Chronicle, anticipating that they were coming, sent me and a female interpreter from Children's Hospital and Meredith May to the border of Iraq and Jordan to travel with them back to America. Now we got there, the border was absolute chaos. We knew the chances were really slim of us finding them. So we flew over a few days early to figure out, how are we going to do this? How are we going to find Salah's family at the border? So we flew into Jordan, and when we got there, I went to Meredith and I, we went to the embassy. And we, give me a second here. So we went to the embassy to see if there was someone that could help us at the border. I met this gruff immigration officer, and he refused to help. I said, listen, we really need help at the border. We need to find this family. And he said, we are unable to help you. So what did I do? I went back on the tool that I know best, and that's photography. I pulled out an image that I had shot of Salah. And I showed him this picture of Salah and told him Salah's story. His eyes welled up with tears, and he shared that he had a son the same age. And he said, what can I do to help you? So he connected us with his colleague, Ali, who was at the border and said he would safely get us to the border and back with Salah's family. The next day, we agreed to meet Ali and his partner at a tiny shack a kilometer from the checkpoint to wait for word that Salah's family had arrived at the border. To disguise ourselves as Westerners, we wore full headscarves. Salah's family's journey to the border was more dangerous than ours, so we didn't know if we would be waiting an hour or a day. To quiet our nerves, we played cards with our escorts. We get the call, or the escort gets the call. Okay, the family has arrived. They're here at the border. Let me take you there. I got to tell you about this situation where we were here at the border. There's a kilometer of non-patrolled lawlessness just inside the Jordan-Iraq border. The locals call it no man's land. A bomb had exploded there yesterday, so Ali suggests we take 2 vehicles. Then he pulls a pistol out of his desk and tucks it into his pants and he asks us, who's riding with me? I raise my hand and say, I'm going with the guy with the gun. With Ali's help, we found the family at the border. Rahim's brother drove Hadia and her kids safely out of Iraq to this border where we met up with them. It was about a 7-hour journey for them. And it would be about 5 days or so with red tape at Amman, Jordan, before they were cleared to leave to America. And this is back inside San Francisco International Airport, the moment that Salah and Rahim saw them. They hadn't seen them in more than a year. So, while these are my secrets for making quality, engaging images, they're also my recipe for fulfillment. We need our work to matter. So I'm inviting you to dive deeper into your work, whether it's your passion for photography or your day job, and ask yourselves, what are the truths you hold most dear? What are some of your guiding principles? What might you do differently to make sure that your work matters, first and foremost to you? I didn't succeed as a photographer because I aimed to be better than my peers. I succeeded because I aim every day to do better through every photograph.
That's really powerful.
And remember, in the end, life is an adventure, especially if we approach it that way. Nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm and hard work. But I would also venture to say that nothing significant could be achieved without a clear tie to joy, either the joy it brings you to create it or the joy that creating it will bring to others. Okay, so thank you for bearing with me through
Sure,
this
that was great.
presentation I'm putting together. But these are just some principles that I've found as I've worked on these stories throughout the year. And let me just get out of this show. So just some things that I wanted to share with you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm gonna,
Do you want to stop the share?
yeah, okay.
There you are.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, sorry if it was a little bit clunky. I was going back and forth between a couple of monitors, but, as I tweak this show, but there are things that I just thought were important to share with all of you.
Yeah, that was great. So you do both editorial and commercial work. How do you find the balance between them? What's it like to jump between them?
Well, what I've found is being a freelancer, building a business as a photographer, photojournalist, but I think for all photographers that we need to diversify. I believe in diversifying, but I also believe in having a niche, something that you're known for. But the diversification, I think, is working for different clients, being able to figure out how do we tell these stories that we want to tell, find that fulfillment, do the work that's true to us and true to our heart, but also make a living at this. I find that the editorial work is really important because it helps to get my stories out to an audience. The commercial work is really great because it helps pay the bills, which allows me to be able to go do these passion projects that I care about. I also think that it's important to diversify the platforms that we work on by including things like audio and video that we can add to our storytelling. So I think it just makes us diverse as photographers. So I've just believed in that. I also do work for nonprofits and foundations. And so I just find, just finding all these different ways that we can do our work and get it out there in the world.
Do you have time to do personal projects?
I do. Yes, I care deeply about personal projects. And, sometimes it's just that blind faith. It's just believing in it. During the pandemic, I had to figure out what to do. And I went out and I worked on several different personal projects. And I had to figure out, first of all, okay, what is safe to do? Is this a safe project to do? And then you figure out, okay, if I wear a mask, part of it's outdoors, I can do this. But just to be able to keep the creative juices flowing and just responding to things that are happening in the news. And one thing I heard about, there was a starling murmuration happening a mile away from me in a cemetery. And so all these starlings would gather at twilight over this cemetery. And it was so interesting because it's, a cemetery in the midst of a pandemic, and people were gravitating there and looking up at this beautiful display of nature. And there was a overflow crowd across the street in the mall. People were laying out sleeping bags in the middle of the mall parking lot, watching this display of nature. That was one project I did. Another project I did was the urban cowgirl, Brianna Noble. And these were personal projects. Another one I did is there was a church in San Francisco where they had taken like selfies of all the parishioners, made 8x10s and taped them to the pews. And this project I have on my website if anyone wants to look at it. But all the pews are filled with these 8x10s of the parishioners. So I went to that church, spent time there telling their story. So personal projects, I think you just have to believe in them. And I think it's so hard to talk ourselves out of them. I can't tell you how many personal projects I've talked myself out of, but once I do it, once I just get out the door, take the first step, things start happening. Things reveal themselves. It just starts coming together. I promise you. It's just the craziest thing. You just have to believe in it and start doing it. Sometimes the story turns out to be completely different than what you thought it's going to be. And sometimes it turns out much better, but it just helps get you out the door, working on things that are true to your heart, things that you believe in.
Great. Want to open up the floor to some questions from people? Feel free to unmute yourself or type into the chat.
Deanne, how do you decide, or what is your thought process in presenting some of your photos and series in black and white as opposed to color?
Yes, there are certain stories that beg to be black and white. The story of Salah, the Iraqi boy. When I was working on that story, I was shooting digitally, and in the beginning, and as I'm working along, I thought that was going to be color. But as we started to get deeper into it, we started to make prints and lay them out on the table and start to look for this cohesiveness. And we were looking at things like, we said, let's take a look at this story in black and white. So we also printed it in black and white and looked at it. The black and white fit the mood of the story. It had this grittiness. It had the color kind of stripped it down to this rawness, to this authenticity. And it fit the mood of the story better than the color did. The black and white also held the images together cohesively.
I would assume the last thing that you want to be thinking about when you're shooting a story is your gear. So I would guess when you go into something, do you have a specific lens that is your always go-to lens, and then you just forget about it and just use that? Or how do you make that decision?
Yes, well, I'm a Nikon photographer. I'm a Nikon ambassador as well. The cameras that I am using kind of 90% of the time now are the mirrorless, the Z6, the Z6 II, the Z7, the Z7 II. Those are my go-to camera bodies that I'm using. I didn't know I was going to like mirrorless. I've been using the D850, the D5, but I absolutely love the mirrorless. So those are my go-to camera bodies. In terms of the lenses, if I'm going into a situation where things are just happening really fast, I might have two zooms, like 24-70, usually the 2.8 and the 70 to 200 2.8. Sometimes if I'm trying to lighten the load, I'll use each of these as the f4, the lighter weight, in that same focal length. More and more though, I'm using primes, and I love using prime lenses. I love the shallow depth of field. So some of my favorite lenses are the 35 1.4 and the 35 and the 85 1.4. Those two I'm using quite a bit, and I find a lot of situations I go in with those two lenses and I can do quite a bit. I can shoot most of what I need with those two lenses.
So do you have
your knowledge? I know which camera bags you use.
Yes. Think Tank. My husband and I are co-founders of Think Tank Camera Bags. And, it was just really interesting the way that came about. It was back in 2005, and Kurt and I, we were both, newspaper photographers. I was working at the San Francisco Chronicle. He was working at the San Francisco Examiner. So, we were always competition, fighting for the best shot. And, but we felt like the camera bags we needed didn't exist. And, we were always trying to figure out ways to carry our camera gear. How do we get it on airplanes? How do we run up and down the sidelines and, carry this gear, but, not kill our backs and be able to be really effective, and efficient and distribute the weight. So we got lucky. We ended up co-founding this company with two amazing bag designers, Doug Murdoch and Mike Sturm, and launched the company in 2005. And now here we are, 16 years later. Hard to believe. And we have over 200 different bags, shoulder bags, backpacks, rolling bags, accessories, belt packs. And, we're distributed in 40 countries. So we really feel fortunate that people have, received our bags as well as they have. I think there's something about photographers designing bags, and we put a lot of heart and soul into it. Our company believes in listening to photographers, and also believes in quality, just making the best bags possible.
I think it was back in those 2005, 2006 on Sports Shooter where we all became acquainted, and I met Doug Murdoch and got behind Think Tank myself, and Doug was really good to me. And today still using the bags, but more unusually, one of my Think Tank bags often, or two of them often, travel in the ammo compartment of a P-51 Mustang when I go places.
Wow, nice. I like it.
Yeah, I don't know how many Think Tank bags I have. Great collection.
Well, we appreciate that.
When you were shooting the football game, were you using something like a 600 millimeter lens?
Generally, my go-to lens for football action is a 400 2.8. So over the years, I've used a 400 2.8 quite a bit. More recently, I've been using, there's the 180 400, which is a great lens. There's the 200 to 400, that I've used over the last couple of years shooting football.
Hey, Deanne, I just wanted to tell you how much I appreciated the humanity and the empathy that comes through in your photography. And it came through very nicely today. So a big hug and a whole bunch of appreciation for that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's always nice to know that your work is resonating with people. So thank you.
I would guess in some places, and not to be sexist, but as a woman, you might feel a different sense of danger to yourself as opposed to perhaps that of a man. Would that be the case?
I think we all feel danger in certain situations. It's different. It's different. There are certainly situations that are more dangerous for a woman, without question. And so, you just try to be smart and, over the years, just figuring out what's the smartest way to do things. Is this photo worth risking my life for? And sometimes you're making those kind of decisions. But, it's a question that people have asked me over the years. What's it like being a woman, especially early on when I was starting, in a male dominated field, and especially in the sports world, like many times in the beginning, I would be the only woman or one of the few women on the sidelines of a football game. But, there were times, I just felt like just let the work speak for itself. I've always felt that way. And, I think that being a woman can work for you and against you. There was the moment when Barry Bonds was staring me down, intimidating me. I think many of you know about Barry Bonds, it's like breaking all the big home run records, but very controversial, did not like the media, was a really challenging person to photograph. And one day he was staring me down and he was intimidating me. And I was nervous. I didn't know what to do. My editor was waiting for pictures. And somehow I got up some confidence and I walked up to him and just looked him straight in the eye and said, "Barry, do you have a problem with me photographing you? And if so, are there some boundaries I should know about?" He paused and then he said, "No, I don't have a problem. What's your name and who are you shooting for?" And from that point forward, he had let down his defense and he let me into his world. And I was able to get the kind of behind the scenes photos of him, at home with his family, and photos of him that we had never seen before. So I'd broken through that barrier. Some people say, oh, he wouldn't have done that, if it was a man. I don't know. You just make your best decision at the moment. At that moment, when I went up to him, I was just feeling like, we're all adults here. I'm not going to stand by and just let someone intimidate me like this. I need to know what's bothering him. Let's just talk. So, sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. In that case, it did.
I can assure you he was the same with the man, because I had a very similar circumstance with him.
Where he intimidated you?
He was attempting, it didn't work. I also went over and talked to him and everything was fine.
Yeah.
Very nice, very nice.
Michael, you had your hand up.
Well, just something that Ian said. Maybe it was because of the wig and the lipstick that you were wearing. Who knows?
I always try to take a few lipsticks with me to make sure I've got the right color.
By color, right? I understand.
Yes, right.
I have just a couple of questions. You said before you really like mirrorless. Can you briefly say why?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Some of the things that I love, first of all, when I first picked a mirrorless camera up, when they were first launched, the Z7 was launched, I think in 2018. And I always thought, no, I'm not a mirrorless photographer. And I picked it up and held it. And I couldn't believe how good it felt in my hands. It is lighter weight, significantly lighter weight. And I was really drawn to that. I said, okay, this is nice. And then I started using it. Some of the features that I love, one thing is I love being able to look through the electronic viewfinder and see the image as I'm changing the exposure. To me, that is huge. I also like being able to switch from stills to video so seamlessly with the mirrorless cameras. Yeah, so it has the same menu system as the cameras that I was used to. So I just picked it up and it was just really easy for me to make the transition over. You know, and it has everything that I had in my DSLR. You know, the frames per second that I need. And yeah, so I've pretty much fallen in love with that camera.
Yeah, for me, I thought I was going to worry about not having to see through the camera when it was turned off. But yeah, after a week, I was used to turning the camera on and just picking it up and working with it.
Right.
And the batteries?
The battery, I had heard nightmare stories,
Mhm.
and I think that might have been the one of the things that made me nervous about going to mirrorless, but I didn't find that to be the case at all. These batteries last so long, and even when I'm doing video, with video, of course, they burns up the battery quicker, but I was surprised. Okay, they don't last as long as with a DSLR, but it's fine. I just make sure I'm always prepared and have, fully charged batteries with me. But it wasn't like the nightmare I had heard with mirrorless camera category in general with battery life.
Yeah, I think Canon and Nikon did their thing right by using the same size batteries, bigger batteries.
Yeah.
Some of the other cameras used a smaller battery because the body was smaller, and when those go through faster. But I've been very satisfied with the battery life.
I do find it a little bit irritating that Nikon chose to upgrade the battery between the D810 and the Z7. The D810 batteries, they're the same size, but they're not the smart battery that are in the Z7. So I have, a bunch of batteries that I can't use with the Z7, but I just bought a half a dozen. So I've always got like a half a dozen fresh batteries. And yes, batteries can be an issue, but if you keep track of your charge and switch a battery before you're doing something serious or important, the battery issue is just something you adapt to. But Deanne, I wanted to actually thank you, number one, for Think Tank. I didn't realize, I didn't put the connection together. And the other thing is, thank you for your authenticity. I agree with what Stephen said. It's interesting to find photographers that are actually really nice people and very humanistic, as opposed to, self-aggrandizing and chest thumping, but that might be the feminine side of you. The other thing I was going to say is when I was a kid growing up, my father had two little plaques above his desk. One was, the harder you work, the luckier you get, which means that if you go out and actually do shit, good things can happen. Bad things can happen too, but at least things happen. If you don't actually get off your butt and go out and shoot, nothing happens. That's been my experience. And the other thing that, the other one that he had was, I met a man who had no shoes and complained until I had no shoes and complained until I met a man that had no feet. So you can, feel bad about your own circumstance right up into the point where you find somebody that has a worse circumstance. And if you can have empathy towards them, I personally, I look at people like you and James Iraqi and photojournalists who I really admire because I just personally I couldn't do that. I couldn't get in there and share people's misery the way that a photojournalist really has to do. So I appreciate what you do, and I'm glad you're doing it so I don't have to.
Let me
There's
finish
room
my
for all of us. Yes.
Let me finish my questions.
Okay.
What photographers do you follow, like?
You mean in terms of like inspiration, just what photographers do I love?
I wouldn't use the word love, but what photographers do you whose images?
Are you talking about photographers living now or influences? And
I don't care if they're alive or dead.
okay.
What photographers?
Oh boy, Elliot Erwitt came up earlier in the conversation, and I am a big fan of Elliot Erwitt. In terms of photojournalists, I love Sebastião Salgado, James Nachtwey,
Mary Ellen Mark?
Mary Ellen Mark. Yep. Yep.
Susan May Zales.
Yes, absolutely. Mizawa, she's amazing. And I love the way she talks about her work as well. Yeah, she's had an incredible career. Yeah, and people who are working today, Lindsay Addario, many of my contemporaries, Amy Vitale, people like Ed Kashi is an inspiration to me. He's really learned to tell stories with stills and with video so well. He just really embraced that. There are so many photographers whose work I admire, many from history, people who had just kind of paved the way for all of us. And people that are working now, just, it's just such a different time to be working now, and, different ways to get our stories out there. We all can be our own publishers and get our stories out there into the world. So, we're able to follow more photographers and see the work that's being done on a daily basis.
Thank you.
Going back to the intimidation scene, I like to tell my friends that the camera will get you in a lot of trouble if you use it right.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love these comments that are coming up like that. And Jeff, your sayings that your father had, those are just so perfect to describe what it is that we're talking about here today, about getting lucky and about just getting out there and starting to work on projects and seeing how things unfold in front of you. I hope that all of you are inspired to go out and work on some personal projects.
Well, it's also about telling truths, isn't it? And you're attempting to tell a truth. And that's, to me, that's critical to why photography matters to me.
Yeah, exactly. And to go in deep and find that truth. Mm-hmm. To take an issue or a person and figure out, what is their truth? And then how do I get in there and discover that truth and find it? Sometimes the truth is different than what you thought, like I find I have to be careful not to go into situations with a preconceived notion and just be really open to finding out what is the truth of this situation and letting it reveal itself.
Yeah, that reminds me of Dorothea Lange saying she liked to go out and get lost in the world.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Because I just find, it's so easy to sit around and talk yourself out of it. But, once you step out the door with your camera, things just start happening.
Where do you see yourself venturing off to between photojournalism and the commercial work?
I think I'm going to just continue doing both of them. It's like, it's a parallel track. It's interesting that people hire me because they love my journalistic work, but then I go into a commercial setting and there are different restrictions and parameters that I'm working under.
So do you think you could do your photojournalistic work for a wedding?
Absolutely, without question. Yeah, I have shot some weddings. It's been a long time, but going in and documenting it as a photojournalistic story, without question. I just think there are so many beautiful moments. It's easy to go in and have this shot list in your mind. It's like, oh, I need to get this, 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 and this. But if you just kind of go in and don't have that kind of a roadmap and just follow the action organically and just see what happens, there'll be all these beautiful moments that happen. And the thing about that I love is there are moments that you can think about before you go to an event. And if I only come back with those moments, I would say it wasn't that great of a success. What I want to come back with are the moments that I could not have envisioned before I went there.
But the other thing is, how do you think that you'll be able, or how have you been able to work your schedule between photojournalism and the commercial work? It must be a disaster.
No, it's just like, basically my life is, I get a call from a client. ESPN called me a couple weeks ago. Deanne, are you available to work on this day? It's like, you figure out what the job is, you work out a contract, boom, I lock that day into my schedule. A week later, I get a call from a commercial client and they say, Deanne, we want you to do a 3-day shoot, like the first week of August. Are you available? Same thing, go through the process, agree on a contract, and then block those days off on my calendar.
So, but the stuff that happens immediately, where you get a call in the morning, it says, you got to be at a certain place at a certain time this afternoon, that presents a problem.
Yes. Okay. I see where you're going.
So you've eliminated that end of it.
Yes. Right. I'm not doing breaking news anymore. When I was a staff photographer at the Chronicle, I was, on staff. So, I get those breaking news calls where you run out. But when I left the Chronicle, I made a conscious decision not to be, like a wire service photographer, breaking news photographer. I decided I wanted to move into some new areas. So I'm not doing many assignments where I get a call, hey, can you go shoot this today?
So if we buy a bag from you, can we get an autographed version?
I'm sure we can figure out a way to do that.
I'll just IM you. I'll message you.
Okay, it's a deal. I'll have to find the right pen that'll work on fabric.
Cool. Well, thank you. This has been a lot of fun and very moving subjects and good talk. Glad you showed us this today. You're getting this presentation ready. I want to thank you for everyone here. Does anyone have any last minute questions or comments, or do you, Deanne, have anything you want to finish up with?
I must say, I've always found it quite exceptional because I've heard you present before, and quite exceptional from your thought process of creating a story and looking at something and finding something special, all the way through your technical expertise is really quite tremendous. You are very special.
Very kind. I appreciate that. I want to thank all of you for coming out today and listening to me talk about my work and share some of these experiences. So basically you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, kind of the usual places, my website. I try to keep updated on my website with events that I have coming up, and I do need to update that, but just some places where you can look and see what I'm up to. I just want to say thank you so much, and I wish you all the best with your photography journey, and I hope you found a little spark of inspiration here today. And John, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of our conversations.
Yeah, thank you, John. And Leanne, on a really serious note, I love your glasses. Where did you get your glasses?
It's Deanne, not Leanne.
Deanne, sorry.
I got them through Peepers. You can go online and order them, like Peepers. They're just like readers and Peepers. And it's really fun because if you go online there, it uses the camera in your computer and you can try on different pairs of glasses, and see how they look on your face.
That could be dangerous for me.
Thank you so much, Dan. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to stop
Thank you very much. Thank you for restoring Think Tank.
Oh, yes, yes. Thank you for your support.
Cool. Let's
Thank you.
Thank
stop
you.
the recording.
Thank you, Deanne.
Thank you, everyone.